The words cut through the air like a blade through silk. When Barack Obama, the man who had redefined American politics, who had made hope and change more than just slogans, who remained the moral compass of the Democratic Party, even in retirement, looked directly at Zohran Mamdani and twisted his own iconic phrase against him. It wasn't just political criticism, it was political excommunication delivered by the closest thing Democrats had to a living deity. In that moment, every person in the room understood they were witnessing the end of Mamdani's national ambitions and the beginning of a lesson about the difference between transformational politics and destructive radicalism. Because when Barack Obama says your approach isn't change we can believe in, every Democrat in America stops believing in you. The confrontation had been inevitable from the moment Mamdani began positioning himself as Obama's true progressive heir. Behind the scenes, Obama's inner circle had been watching Mamdani's rise with growing alarm, not because they disagreed with progressive goals, but because they understood something the young mayor didn't. Successful political change requires building coalitions, not burning them down. The setting for this political reckoning was the Obama Foundation's Democracy Forum, held at the gleaming new Obama Presidential Center in Chicago. The annual gathering brought together young political leaders from across the country for what was billed as a conversation about the future of American democracy. Mamdani had been invited as the keynote speaker, a recognition that should have been the crowning moment of his meteoric rise. Instead, it became the stage for his political execution. Obama had been scheduled to offer brief introductory remarks before Mamdani's speech, but those close to the former president later revealed that he had spent the previous week carefully crafting what would become the most devastating takedown in modern democratic politics. This wasn't going to be a gentle correction or a nuanced disagreement. This was Barack Obama, the master of political rhetoric, preparing to demonstrate why he remained the gold standard of democratic leadership while others were mere pretenders to his legacy. The audience that packed the auditorium represented the future of democratic politics, young activists, aspiring candidates, progressive organizers, and the kind of diverse coalition that Obama had pioneered. They had come expecting to hear from the rising star, who many considered Obama's ideological successor. They were about to witness his political destruction instead. Obama took the stage to thunderous applause, his presence still commanding after all these years. The audience rose to their feet, many with tears in their eyes as they were reminded of what presidential leadership looked like. But there was something different in Obama's demeanor, a sharpness, a sense of purpose that suggested this wouldn't be his typical inspirational address. "Thank you," Obama said, his voice carrying that familiar cadence that had once filled stadiums across America. "Please, sit down. We have important work to do here today, and important lessons to learn about what real change looks like." The phrase "real change" hung in the air with deliberate weight. Obama was already setting the stage for what was to come, establishing himself as the authority on transformation while questioning whether others truly understood what they were claiming to represent. "I want to talk to you about something that's been on my mind," Obama continued, his tone becoming more serious. "About the difference between change that builds and change that destroys. About leadership that brings people together and rhetoric that drives them apart." The audience sensed something significant was building. This wasn't the usual Obama Foundation speech about democracy and civic engagement. This was something more pointed, more consequential. 14 years ago, when I first ran for president, I talked about change we can believe in, Obama said, invoking his most famous slogan. But I want to be very clear about what I meant by that phrase, because I think some people have forgotten what real change requires. He paused, letting the implications sink in before delivering the blow that would end Mamdani's career. Change we can believe in doesn't mean burning down institutions. It means building them up. It doesn't mean attacking everyone who disagrees with you. It means persuading them to join you. It doesn't mean promising revolution that you can't deliver. It means delivering results that improve people's lives. The audience was hanging on every word, sensing that Obama was building towards something unprecedented. But it was his next statement that would become the defining moment of the event and perhaps of Mamdani's entire political career. "I've been watching some of the political rhetoric coming from progressive circles lately," Obama said, his voice taking on the stern tone of a disappointed father. "And I have to say, some of what I'm hearing, the anger, the divisiveness, the attacks on fellow Democrats, this isn't change we can believe in. This is exactly the kind of politics I spent my career trying to move beyond." The reference was unmistakable. Everyone in the audience understood that Obama was talking about Mamdani, who was sitting in the front row looking increasingly uncomfortable. But Obama wasn't finished. Real change happens when you expand the tent, not when you burn it down, he continued. It happens when you build bridges, not when you blow them up. It happens when you remember that your political opponents are still Americans, and that your political allies deserve respect, even when they disagree with your tactics. The systematic demolition of Mamdani's entire political approach was methodical and devastating. Obama was using his moral authority as the Democratic Party's elder statesman to establish the boundaries of acceptable progressive politics, and Mamdani clearly fell outside those boundaries. "I want to tell you a story about my first year as president," Obama said, his voice taking on the storytelling cadence that had made him famous. "I came into office promising change, promising to transform healthcare, promising to rebuild our economy after the worst financial crisis since the Great Depression. And I had a choice to make. I could have demanded everything I wanted and gotten nothing, or I could have built coalitions and gotten most of what I wanted." The lesson was clear, and the contrast with Mamdani's confrontational approach was obvious to everyone present. We passed the Affordable Care Act not by attacking everyone who had concerns, but by addressing those concerns. We rebuilt the economy not by declaring war on business, but by working with business to create jobs. We made progress on climate change not by demonizing everyone who disagreed with us, but by showing them a path forward that served their interests too. Obama's examples were chosen deliberately. Each one represented the kind of pragmatic progressivism that had defined his presidency, and each one stood in stark contrast to Mamdani's radical rhetoric and confrontational tactics. But it was Obama's conclusion that delivered the knockout blow to Mamdani's political career. So when I see young leaders who claim to represent the future of progressive politics, but whose first instinct is to attack rather than persuade, whose response to disagreement is confrontation rather than conversation, whose approach to change is destruction rather than construction, I have to ask, is this really the change we can believe in? The question hung in the air like an indictment. Obama had just systematically dismantled Mamdani's entire political identity using the very phrase that had made Obama famous. The irony was perfect. The man who had inspired a generation of progressive activists was now explaining why one of those activists had lost his way. "I believe in progressive values," Obama continued. "I believe in fighting for working families, for healthcare as a right, for addressing climate change, for expanding opportunity for everyone. But I also believe that how you fight matters as much as what you fight for. And if your fighting alienates the very people you need to win, then you're not fighting for progress, you're fighting against it." The audience was stunned into silence. This wasn't just a critique of Mamdani's tactics, it was a fundamental rejection of his entire approach to politics. Obama had just declared that Mamdani's version of progressivism was actually harmful to progressive causes. Mamdani, sitting in the front row, looked visibly shaken. The man he had idolized, whose poster had hung in his college dorm room, whose speeches he had memorized, was now publicly destroying his political credibility. But Obama still wasn't finished. "Change we can believe in means change that lasts," he said, his voice rising with passion. "And change doesn't last when it's built on anger and division. It lasts when it's built on hope and unity. It lasts when it brings people together instead of driving them apart. It lasts when it makes people feel included in America's promise, not excluded from it." The contrast was devastating. Obama was describing exactly the kind of politics that had made him the most successful Democratic politician of the 21st century, while implicitly arguing that Mamdani represented everything that was wrong with contemporary progressive activism. "So to all the young leaders here today," Obama concluded, looking directly at Mamdani, "I want you to remember this. Real leadership isn't about making the loudest noise or picking the biggest fights. Real leadership is about building the broadest coalitions and delivering the most meaningful results. That's the change we can believe in. That's the change America needs." The applause that followed was polite but subdued. The audience understood they had just witnessed something historic, the effective end of Mamdani's national political career, delivered by the man who remained the gold standard of democratic leadership. Mamdani's response, when it came, was a master class in political self-destruction. Rather than acknowledging Obama's critique or attempting to find common ground with the former president, he chose to double down on exactly the kind of confrontational rhetoric that Obama had just condemned. President Obama, I have tremendous respect for what you accomplished, Mamdani began, his voice betraying his nervousness. But I have to respectfully disagree with the premise that we should moderate our demands for justice in order to make others comfortable with our movement. The audience shifted uncomfortably. Calling Obama's approach, making others comfortable, was a devastating mischaracterization that revealed how little Mamdani understood about coalition politics. The climate crisis, economic inequality, and systemic racism aren't problems that can be solved through incremental change, Mamdani continued, falling deeper into the trap Obama had set for him. Sometimes transformation requires confrontation. Sometimes progress demands that we stop trying to placate those who benefit from the status quo. Every word Mamdani spoke reinforced Obama's critique. Here was a young politician lecturing the former president about the need for confrontation, proving Obama's point about the destructive nature of his approach. With all due respect, Mr. President, Mamdani concluded, I believe the change we need is bigger than what the current system can deliver. And if that makes some people uncomfortable, then maybe it's time for them to examine why they're so invested in maintaining a system that fails so many Americans. The silence that followed was deafening. Mamdani had just committed political suicide by essentially accusing Obama of being invested in maintaining an unjust system. The audience couldn't believe what they had just witnessed: a mayor from New York lecturing the first black president about systemic injustice and the need for radical change. Obama's response was brief but lethal. Rising from his chair with the dignity that had defined his presidency, he said, "Thank you, Mayor Mamdani. I think you've just demonstrated exactly the kind of politics I was talking about." The understated response was more devastating than any angry rebuttal could have been. Obama had remained calm and presidential while Mamdani had revealed himself to be exactly the divisive figure Obama had warned against. The reaction was swift and catastrophic for Mamdani's political future. Within hours, clips were circulating on social media with devastating headlines. Democratic politicians across the country rushed to distance themselves from Mamdani and align themselves with Obama's message of unity and pragmatism. Most damaging was the reaction from the progressive grassroots themselves. The young activists who had come to hear Mamdani speak left talking about Obama's wisdom and Mamdani's arrogance. Many posted on social media about how Mamdani's response had made them reconsider their support for radical progressive politics. If Barack Obama thought this approach was wrong, maybe it was time to listen. The long-term consequences were severe. Within a week, 3 major progressive organizations announced they were refocusing on coalition building rather than confrontational politics. Union leaders who had supported Mamdani began questioning whether his radical rhetoric was helping their members. Most importantly, young activists started looking for leaders who embodied Obama's vision of transformational but unifying politics. For Obama himself, the exchange reinforced his position as the Democratic Party's elder statesman. His ability to destroy Mamdani's credibility while remaining dignified reminded everyone why he remained the most respected figure in Democratic politics. Republicans, who had hoped to use Mamdani's radicalism against all Democrats, found their strategy undermined by Obama's clear rejection of destructive progressive politics. The irony was perfect in its cruelty. Mamdani had spent his entire career trying to position himself as Obama's progressive heir, only to be destroyed by Obama himself using the very slogan that had made the former president famous. Change we can believe in had become change we can't believe in, and the messenger was the man who had inspired Mamdani's political awakening. In trying to out Obama, Mamdani had instead reminded everyone why Barack Obama remained in a class by himself, a politician who could inspire transformational change while maintaining the dignity, wisdom, and coalition-building skills that made lasting progress possible. The student had challenged the teacher, and the teacher had provided a masterclass in why experience matters more than ideological purity. As one Democratic strategist put it in the aftermath, Obama didn't just destroy Mamdani's career, he saved the Democratic Party from electoral disaster. Sometimes the most progressive thing you can do is stop calling yourself progressive and start calling yourself effective. The change America could believe in, it turned out, looked a lot more like Barack Obama and a lot less like Zohran Mamdani.